My mother said, "Your sister's family will always come first. You are always last." My father agreed. I answered, "Good to know." So I put myself first in my own life. Separate money, separate plans. Then a family emergency hit them. They expected me to pay, but what happened next left them frozen. I was 26 years old when my mother finally said out loud what I had suspected for most of my life. We were sitting in my parents' living room, the same beige carpet and floral wallpaper that had witnessed every major family discussion since I was a child. My older sister Natalie had just announced that she needed help with a down payment for a house. And naturally, the conversation turned to how the family could pull resources to make it happen. "We can contribute from the savings we set aside, my mother," Lorraine said, her voice warm and certain. "And of course, we'll need everyone to pitch in. Natalie has the children to think about after all." I shifted in my seat. Natalie's husband, Derek, sat beside her, scrolling through his phone as if this conversation had nothing to do with him. Their two kids, Emma, who was 7, and Lucas, who was 4, were upstairs watching cartoons. My father, Gerald, nodded along, already mentally calculating numbers. "I actually can't contribute right now," I said carefully. "I'm saving for my own apartment, and I just started paying off my student loans more aggressively." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. Lorraine turned to me with an expression I had seen countless times before. That mixture of disappointment and gentle condescension that she reserved specifically for moments when I failed to meet her expectations. "Emily, your sister has a family. You're single. You don't have the same responsibilities." "I have responsibilities to myself," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the familiar twist in my stomach. "Your sister's family will always come first," my mother said, and the words landed like stones. "You are always last. That's just how it is. Natalie has children, a mortgage, real obligations. You have a studio apartment and a cat." I looked at my father, hoping for something. Anything that might contradict what I was hearing. Gerald met my eyes briefly before glancing away. "Your mother's right, Emily. Family means sacrifice. Natalie needs us." I sat there for a long moment, feeling something shift inside me. 26 years of being the afterthought, the backup plan, the one whose achievements were mentioned briefly before conversations returned to Natalie's children, or Natalie's marriage, or Natalie's career challenges. 26 years of birthday parties where my mother spent more time discussing my sister's life than acknowledging mine. 26 years of being told that my choices were lesser because they didn't include a husband and babies. "Good to know," I said quietly. Lorraine blinked. "What does that mean?" I stood up, gathering my purse. "It means I understand where I stand. Thank you for being clear about it." I drove home that night with my hands shaking on the steering wheel. My cat Winston greeted me at the door of my small apartment, and I sat on the floor with him for an hour, just breathing and thinking and trying to process what had happened. Part of me wanted to cry. Another part felt strangely liberated. My parents had finally admitted what I had always sensed, and now I could stop hoping things might be different. The next morning, I made a decision that would change everything. I called my bank and opened a new savings account, one that my parents didn't know about. I redirected a portion of my paycheck into it automatically. I started tracking every dollar I spent, cutting unnecessary expenses and building what I mentally called my independence fund. If I was going to be last in my family's priorities, then I would become first in my own. Over the following months, I transformed my financial life completely. I picked up freelance graphic design work on weekends, leveraging skills I had developed during college but never seriously monetized. I negotiated a raise at my marketing job by documenting my contributions and presenting them to my supervisor with confidence I had to fake until it became real. I stopped buying lunch out and started meal prepping on Sundays. Every sacrifice felt like an investment in a future where I wouldn't need anyone's help. My relationship with my family became cordial but distant. I attended holiday dinners and birthday parties, smiled at the right moments, and left as early as politeness allowed. When Lorraine called to update me on Natalie's life, I listened without offering much commentary. When Gerald asked why I seemed different, I told him I was just busy with work. "You've changed, my mother said one Thanksgiving, studying me across the table with narrowed eyes. "You used to be more involved with the family." "I'm still involved," I replied. "I'm here, aren't I?" "Physically, yes. But you don't volunteer for things anymore. You didn't help with Emma's birthday party planning. You didn't offer to babysit when Natalie needed a break last month." I took a sip of wine before responding. I had work commitments. I'm sure Derek's parents were able to help. Natalie shot me a look that I couldn't quite interpret. We had never been close, not really, but there had always been a thread of connection between us that felt more strained now. She was 3 years older than me, and our mother had always positioned her as the successful one, the one who had followed the correct path of marriage and motherhood and suburban stability. I had been the creative one, the dreamer, the one who couldn't quite figure out what she wanted from life. Except now I knew exactly what I wanted. I wanted security that depended on no one but myself. By my 28th birthday, I had saved $40,000. I told no one. By my 28th birthday, I had saved $40,000. I told no one. When my parents gave me a card with a $50 bill inside and spent most of the dinner talking about Lucas's Little League achievements, I smiled and thanked them and went home to check my investment portfolio. I had started putting money into index funds, reading everything I could about compound interest and long-term wealth building. The numbers on my screen were a comfort that my family's approval could never provide. I bought a condo when I was 29, a small 2-bedroom in a decent neighborhood. Nothing fancy, but it was mine. I paid 20% down in cash and got a mortgage with terms I could manage easily. The day I signed the papers, I sat in my empty living room and cried, though I couldn't tell if the tears were from joy or grief or some complicated mixture of both. The condo became my sanctuary in ways I hadn't anticipated. I spent weekends painting the walls colors I actually liked, a deep sage green in the bedroom, and warm terracotta in the living room, choices that would have made Lorraine purse her lips in disapproval. I hung art that spoke to me, rather than art that impressed visitors. I arranged furniture for my own comfort, rather than for entertaining guests who rarely came anyway. Every decision from the kitchen cabinet hardware to the bathroom tiles belonged entirely to me. Jennifer, a colleague from work who had become something close to a genuine friend, helped me move in. She carried boxes up 3 flights of stairs without complaint and assembled my bookshelf while I unpacked kitchen supplies. During a break, sitting on my bare living room floor eating pizza from paper plates, she asked me something that caught me off guard. "Do you ever feel guilty about pulling away from your family like this?" I chewed slowly, considering my answer. Sometimes late at night. Mostly I wonder if I'm being too harsh. If maybe I misunderstood their intentions all these years. Then I remember specific moments, specific words, and the guilt fades. Like what? Like when I graduated summa cum laude from college, and my mother spent the entire celebration dinner talking about how Natalie was thinking about having another baby. Like when I got my first promotion and my father asked if that meant I could finally help pay off Natalie's credit card debt. Like every Christmas where my gifts were afterthoughts while Emma and Lucas unwrapped mountains of carefully chosen presents. Jennifer shook her head slowly. That's rough. The worst part is they don't even realize they're doing it. In their minds, they love both daughters equally. The favoritism is so normalized that pointing it out makes me look petty and jealous. You're not petty. You're protecting yourself. Those words stayed with me long after Jennifer went home that night. Protection. That's exactly what my financial independence had become. A shield against the vulnerability of needing people who had proven themselves unreliable. My savings account wasn't just money, it was armor. The first real test of my new boundaries came about 8 months after I moved into the condo. Natalie called me on a Wednesday evening, her voice carrying that particular tension that meant she wanted something. "Derek's car broke down," she said, after minimal pleasantries. "The transmission is shot. We need to replace it, but we're stretched thin right now with the kids' activities and everything. Mom and Dad already helped us last month with the roof repair, so I can't ask them again so soon." I waited knowing what was coming. "Could you lend us $3,000 just until Derek's bonus comes through in January? 4 months tops." My immediate instinct was to say yes. That old programming ran deep. The desire to be helpful, to be needed to prove through action that I was worthy of my place in the family. I had to physically stop myself from agreeing before I'd even considered the request properly. "I need to think about it," I said instead. "Can I call you back tomorrow?" Natalie's surprise was audible. "You need to think about helping your own sister." "I need to think about lending someone $3,000. Yes, that's a significant amount of money. I'll call you tomorrow." I hung up before she could argue further. That night I couldn't sleep. I ran the numbers in my head, calculated how lending that money would affect my savings goals, weighed the likelihood of actually being repaid in January versus the loan stretching indefinitely. More than the practical considerations, though, I thought about the pattern this would establish. If I said yes now, I would become a resource to be tapped whenever the primary sources ran dry. My boundaries would mean nothing if I abandoned them the first time they were tested. The next day I called Natalie back with my answer. "I'm not going to lend you the money," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I know that's not what you want to hear, but it's my decision." The silence on the other end was frigid. "Seriously? You have the money. I know you do. You're just choosing not to help. I'm choosing to maintain my financial boundaries. There are other options available to you. You could look into a personal loan from the credit union. Derek's parents might be able to help. You could trade down to a less expensive used car while you rebuild your savings. I can't believe you're lecturing me about financial responsibility when you're sitting on a pile of money and refusing to help family. I'm not lecturing you. I'm explaining why I'm saying no. And I understand if you're angry with me, but this is my decision and I'm not changing it. Natalie hung up without saying goodbye. The following Sunday, at our parents' house, she barely spoke to me. Lorraine kept glancing between us with a worried expression and eventually pulled me aside in the kitchen. What happened between you and your sister? She asked to borrow money, and I said no. My mother's face shifted through several expressions before settling on disappointment. Emily, family helps family. That's what we do. Family also respects each other's boundaries. I've helped in the past. I'm not obligated to help every single time someone asks. But you have the resources. What's the point of having money if you won't use it to help the people you love? I dried a dish slowly, choosing my words with care. The point is security. The point is knowing that if something happens to me, I won't be dependent on anyone else's generosity. The same generosity that apparently comes with strings and expectations and a running tally of who owes what to whom. Lorraine opened her mouth to argue, then closed it again. Something in my expression must have warned her that this was not a battle she would win. Derek ended up getting a personal loan from his credit union exactly as I had suggested. The car was replaced, the crisis passed, and within a few weeks the family seemed to have moved on. But I noticed that Natalie's attitude toward me had hardened into something permanent. Where before she had been casually dismissive, now she was actively cold. I had violated an unspoken rule by refusing to play my assigned role, and she would not forgive that easily. Strangely, her coldness bothered me less than I expected. I had spent so many years trying to earn her affection to be the good little sister who was always available to help, always ready to be supportive. Releasing that effort felt like setting down a weight I hadn't realized I was carrying. If Natalie only valued me for what I could provide, then her regard wasn't worth much anyway. My 30th birthday arrived with little fanfare from my family, but with a profound sense of personal accomplishment. I threw myself a small party at the condo, inviting Jennifer and a handful of other friends I had cultivated over the years. We drank wine and laughed and talked about everything except family obligations. One friend, Marcus, who worked in financial planning, raised his glass in a toast. To Emily, who figured out what most people never do, that investing in yourself pays the best dividends. I thought about those words for days afterward. Investing in myself. That's precisely what the past 4 years had been. Every dollar, saved every boundary maintained, every moment of discomfort endured, when I chose my own well-being over family expectations. The returns were evident in my peace of mind, in my financial stability, and in the quiet confidence I now carried through every aspect of my life. I invited my parents to see the place a few weeks after I moved in. Lorraine walked through the rooms with an expression of vague surprise, as if she couldn't quite understand how I had managed this. "This is nice, Emily," she said. "Finally. How did you afford it?" I saved. "But you said you were paying off student loans." "I finished those last year. I've been focused on building savings since then." My father examined the windows, testing the locks with an approving nod. "Good neighborhood, safe area. You did well." It was perhaps the most genuine compliment he had ever given me, and I held on to it, despite knowing it didn't change anything fundamental about our relationship. Natalie called me that night, her voice carrying an edge I didn't recognize. "Mom says you bought a condo." "I did. She's worried about you. She thinks you're isolating yourself from the family." I laughed, though there was no humor in it. That's interesting, coming from the woman who told me I would always be last. Silence stretched between us. When Natalie spoke again, her tone had softened. "She shouldn't have said that. I told her it was wrong." "Did you when?" "After you left that night. Derek and I both thought it was too harsh." "But you still took the down payment help." "That's different. We needed it. The kids needed stability." I closed my eyes, leaning against my kitchen counter. "I'm not blaming you for taking help that was offered, Natalie. I'm just explaining why I've made the choices I've made. If I'm always going to be last in this family's priorities, then I need to make sure I'm first in my own." She was quiet for a moment. "That sounds lonely." "It's not. It's actually the least lonely I've ever felt." The years passed in a rhythm I found increasingly comfortable. I advanced in my career, eventually becoming a senior marketing manager at a mid-sized tech company. My freelance work evolved into a steady side business, and I expanded my investment portfolio carefully and consistently. I dated occasionally, though nothing serious developed. I adopted another cat, a calico named Maple, who kept Winston company. I traveled alone to places I had always wanted to see: Iceland, Japan, Portugal, New Zealand. Each trip was funded entirely by my own money, planned according to my own schedule, answerable to no one's expectations but my own. My family gatherings remained obligatory affairs that I attended out of duty rather than desire. Emma grew into a precocious preteen who reminded me of Natalie at that age in all confidence and certainty. Lucas became a quiet, thoughtful child who sometimes sought me out at family dinners to ask questions about my travels. I showed him photos on my phone and told him stories about glaciers and temples and coastlines, watching his eyes widen with wonder. "Why do you go alone?" he asked me once, genuinely curious. "Because I like my own company," I told him, "and because I can go wherever I want, whenever I want, without having to compromise with anyone else." He considered this with a seriousness only a 9-year-old can muster. "That sounds kind of cool, actually." "It is," I agreed. "It really is." Lorraine overheard this exchange and pulled me aside later, her expression troubled. "You shouldn't be encouraging him to think that way. Family is important. Community is important." I didn't say it wasn't. I just answered his question honestly. "You make it sound like being alone is better than being with people who love you." I met her eyes directly. The people who love me haven't always shown it in ways that felt like love. She had no response to that. The emergency happened on a Tuesday in March, 3 months after my 32nd birthday. I was at work when my phone lit up with multiple messages from Natalie, each more frantic than the last. I stepped out of a meeting to call her back, and her voice was raw with panic. "Dad had a heart attack. He's in surgery. Mom is falling apart. Can you come to the hospital?" I went immediately. Whatever complicated feelings I had about my family, Gerald was still my father, and I was incapable of simply ignoring a medical crisis. I found Lorraine in the surgical waiting room, pale and trembling, and I sat beside her without speaking. Natalie arrived shortly after Derek, having stayed home with the kids. The surgery took 4 hours. Gerald survived, but the cardiologist delivered sobering news: extensive damage, a long recovery, and significant lifestyle changes required. He would need cardiac rehabilitation, ongoing medication, and careful monitoring for the foreseeable future. He should retire, the doctor said plainly. The stress of his job contributed to this. If he wants to live to see his grandchildren grow up, he needs to make different choices. Gerald had worked for the same manufacturing company for 30 years. He was 58 years old and had planned to work until at least 65. Early retirement would mean reduced pension benefits and a significant income drop for my parents. The financial discussions began almost immediately. Lorraine sat at my father's hospital bedside, 3 days after the surgery, calculator in hand, trying to work out how they could manage on a reduced income while covering the medical bills that insurance wouldn't fully address. "We have some savings," she said, her voice thin with exhaustion, "but it won't last long. Not with the medications he'll need, and the rehabilitation program and adjustments to the house for accessibility." Natalie had been uncharacteristically quiet throughout these conversations. She and Derek were comfortable but not wealthy. His job at a regional insurance firm provided stability, though their own expenses with 2 children left little room for generosity toward others. I could see the conflict on my sister's face as she weighed our parents' needs against her own family's security. "We can help some," Natalie said carefully. "Maybe a few hundred a month. But with Emma starting middle school next year, and the costs that come with that, we can't do more." Lorraine nodded, though her disappointment was visible. "Every bit helps." Then both of them turned to look at me. I had been sitting in the corner of the hospital room, listening, without contributing. I knew this moment was coming. I had known it since the cardiologist first delivered his prognosis. My family would need money, and they would expect me to provide it. "Emily," my mother said, and her voice carried that familiar tone, the one that assumed my compliance was inevitable. "You've always been so good with money, and you don't have the expenses that Natalie does. I'm sure you could help more substantially." I took a breath before responding. "How much are you asking for?" Lorraine exchanged a glance with Natalie. "Well, between the medical bills and the income loss, we're looking at a shortfall of roughly $80,000 over the next 2 years. If you could cover half of that, Natalie's contribution and our savings could handle the rest." 40,000. The exact amount I had saved by my 28th birthday, now grown substantially larger through careful investment. They were asking me to hand over a significant portion of my financial security to subsidize a family that had explicitly told me I would always be their lowest priority. No. The word hung in the air like smoke. Lorraine's expression shifted from expectation to confusion to something approaching anger. "What do you mean, no?" I'm not going to write you a check for 40,000. "Emily, this is your father's health. We're talking about your father's life." "I understand that, and I'm glad he survived the surgery. I hope he recovers fully, but I'm not going to drain my savings to fund that recovery when you've made it abundantly clear over the years where I stand in this family's priorities." Natalie stepped forward, her voice sharp. "This is petty. This is unbelievably petty. Dad could have died, but he didn't. And the issue now is money, which has always been the real measure of value in this family. When you needed a down payment, Mom and Dad found the resources. When I needed support for my education, I was told to take out loans because resources were limited. When your kids need anything, the whole family mobilizes. When I accomplish something, it barely registers. So forgive me if I've stopped volunteering to fund a system that has never worked in my favor." Lorraine stood up, her face flushed. "I never imagined you could be so cruel after everything we've done for you." "What have you done for me, Mom? Specifically, I'm genuinely asking. We raised you, we fed you, we gave you a home. You did the minimum legal requirement for parents. That's not a debt I owe you for the rest of my life." My father, who had been drowsing in his hospital bed, opened his eyes at the rising voices. "What's happening?" Lorraine turned to him, tears streaming down her face. "Your daughter refuses to help us. She's going to let us struggle while she sits on her savings." Gerald looked at me, and for a moment I saw something unexpected in his expression. Not anger, but a weariness that seemed to acknowledge something he had never admitted before. "Emily, is that true?" "I'm not refusing all help," I said, keeping my voice calm. "I'm refusing to be the primary financial solution for a family that has never prioritized me. If you need help finding cost-effective rehabilitation programs, I can research that. If you need someone to drive you to appointments, I can arrange my schedule. But I won't hand over tens of thousands of dollars to prove my worth to people who told me I would always be last." The room fell silent, except for the beeping of medical monitors. My father closed his eyes again, and when he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Maybe. We deserve that." Lorraine whipped around to stare at him. "Gerald, she's not wrong, Lorraine. We've never treated the girls equally. We always assumed Emily would be fine because she was independent. So we focused on Natalie because she seemed to need more support. But that wasn't fair. It was never fair." I hadn't expected that. In all my preparations for this confrontation, in all my mental rehearsals of standing firm against family pressure, I had never imagined my father would actually acknowledge the truth. "It doesn't matter now whether it was fair or not," Natalie said, her voice brittle. "What matters is that Dad needs help, and Emily is choosing money over family." "I'm choosing myself," I corrected. "For the first time in my life, I'm choosing myself. And I'm not going to apologize for it." I left the hospital that night with my hands steady and my conscience clear. The silence from my family over the following weeks was expected. What surprised me was how little it hurt. I had spent so many years hoping for their approval, their recognition, their love expressed in actions rather than obligations. Releasing that hope felt less like loss and more like liberation. A month later, I received a call from my Aunt Patricia, my mother's sister. She was the family member I had always felt closest to, a woman who had never married and had built a successful career as a corporate attorney. She had always seen me, truly seen me, in ways my parents never had. "I heard about what happened at the hospital," she said without preamble. "Your mother called me, hoping I would talk some sense into you." Patricia laughed. "I told her that you were the most sensible person in the whole damn family, and that she should be grateful you showed up at all after how she's treated you." I felt a rush of gratitude so intense it nearly brought tears to my eyes. "Thank you for saying that. I'm saying it because it's true. Emily, I want you to know that I've watched you build your life over these past years, and I'm incredibly proud of you. You've done what I wish more women would do, refuse to sacrifice yourself on the altar of family obligation, when that family couldn't be bothered to offer you basic respect. It hasn't been easy. The worthwhile things rarely are, but you've proven something important. You've proven that you can stand alone, and that standing alone doesn't mean being lonely or cold or any of the other things they'll try to call you. It means being strong enough to value yourself even when others won't." I held on to that conversation like a talisman in the difficult months that followed. True to my word, I helped my family in practical ways that didn't involve writing large checks. I spent hours researching medical billing options and found several programs that significantly reduced my father's out-of-pocket costs. I coordinated with his doctors to ensure his rehabilitation plan was optimal and cost-effective. I drove him to appointments when my schedule allowed, and sat with him during long recovery sessions, listening to stories from his childhood that I had never heard before. Slowly, something shifted between us. Gerald began talking to me differently, asking about my work, and my travels with genuine interest rather than polite disinterest. He admitted that he had always been afraid of my independence, that my self-sufficiency had made him feel unnecessary and perhaps even inadequate as a father. "I thought if you didn't need us, you wouldn't want us," he said one afternoon, sitting in his recliner at home while cardiac rehabilitation exercises played on the television. So I leaned harder into Natalie and the kids because they seemed to want us around. "I always wanted you around," I told him quietly. "I just stopped begging for attention when it became clear I wasn't going to get it." He looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Emily. I know it's late, and I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I am truly sorry." Lorraine was slower to come around. Her pride had been wounded not just by my refusal, but by my articulation of exactly why I was refusing. She avoided me at family gatherings for months, speaking to me only when necessary, her voice carrying a frost that once would have devastated me. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. I had stopped by my parents' house to drop off some groceries, a habit I had developed since my father's health crisis. Lorraine was alone in the kitchen, staring out the window at the backyard where Natalie and I had played as children. "I've been thinking," she said, without turning around, "about what you said at the hospital." I set the grocery bags on the counter and waited. I convinced myself that prioritizing Natalie was practical. She had children. She needed more support. It made logical sense. But you were right. I was measuring your worth differently because your life looked different, and that wasn't fair. She finally turned to face me, and I saw that she had been crying. "I don't know how to fix it. I don't know if it can be fixed, but I want you to know that I see it now. I see what I did." "That's a start," I said simply. "Is there any chance you could forgive me eventually?" I considered the question honestly. Forgiveness felt too simple a word for what she was asking. What she really wanted was absolution, a return to a relationship that had never truly existed, a wiping clean of decades of accumulated hurt. "I don't know yet," I told her, "but I'm willing to find out." It wasn't the reconciliation she probably hoped for, but it was the truth. And truth was more valuable to me now than comfortable lies. 6 months after my father's heart attack, Natalie called me with news that shifted the entire family dynamic. Derek had been offered a significant promotion, but it required relocation to another state. She was torn, she said, between her husband's career opportunity and her desire to stay close to our parents, especially given Gerald's ongoing health concerns. "What do you think I should do?" she asked. And I realized it was the first time she had ever asked for my opinion on anything significant in her life. "I think you should do what's best for your immediate family," I said. "Emma and Lucas and Derek, Mom and Dad have me. I'm not going anywhere." "But you've been so distant." "I've been establishing boundaries. There's a difference. I never stopped caring about them. I just stopped sacrificing myself to prove that I care." Natalie was quiet for a long moment. "I owe you an apology too. I took advantage of being the favorite. I let Mom and Dad give me things that should have been shared equally. I told myself it was because I needed it more, but that was just an excuse." "Yes," I agreed. "It was. I'm sorry. Thank you for saying that. Do you forgive me?" I thought about all the years of feeling invisible, overshadowed, less than. I thought about the down payment my parents had given her while I struggled with student loans. I thought about birthday dinners, dominated by discussions of her children's holidays, where I was expected to help but never celebrated. Then I thought about how exhausting it was to carry resentment, how heavy it made everything feel. My independence had brought me freedom, but perhaps part of that freedom was the ability to let go of old wounds. "I'm working on it," I said. "That's the best I can offer right now." Natalie and her family moved 3 months later. My parents took it hard, especially Lorraine, who had built much of her identity around being an involved grandmother. But something surprising emerged from their grief. They began to appreciate my presence in ways they never had before. I became the daughter who was there, the one who showed up for Sunday dinners, who accompanied my mother to her book club events when she felt shy about going alone, who helped my father with the physical therapy exercises he hated doing. I wasn't replacing Natalie. I was simply being seen for the first time in my life. My 34th birthday was the most memorable one I had ever experienced with my family. Lorraine baked a cake from scratch, something she had only ever done for Natalie's birthdays. Gerald gave a toast that made me cry, talking about my strength and resilience, and how proud he was of the woman I had become. "I spent too many years not seeing you clearly," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't want to waste whatever time I have left making the same mistake." Later that evening, after my parents had gone to bed, I sat on their back porch, looking up at the stars. My phone buzzed with a message from Natalie. photos from Emma's school play, accompanied by text that read, "Wish you could have been here. She asked about you." I smiled at the pictures and typed back a response. We weren't close yet, not really. But we were building something new, something that didn't rely on old patterns of favoritism and neglect. It was slower and more honest, and infinitely more valuable than whatever had existed before. Patricia called me the following week to check in, as she did regularly now. "How are you feeling about everything?" "Different," I admitted. "Good. Different. I think it's strange to finally be seen by people who ignored me for so long." "Does it feel like enough?" I considered her question carefully. It feels like progress. It feels like proof that setting boundaries actually works, that prioritizing yourself doesn't mean you end up alone. My parents had to lose easy access to Natalie before they could appreciate what they had in me. That's sad, but it's also human. "And your savings, the money they wanted?" "Left," I said. "Still in my account. Still growing." I helped them find other solutions, and they figured it out without draining my financial security. It turns out that when you stop offering to sacrifice yourself, people become remarkably creative at solving their own problems. That's a lesson most people never learn. I had to learn it the hard way, but I learned it. I ended that call feeling something I couldn't quite name, a sense of completion perhaps, or of a chapter finally closing. My family would never be perfect. The wounds we had inflicted on each other would leave scars that occasional apologies couldn't erase entirely. But we were trying, all of us, to build something better from the wreckage of what had been. Standing in my kitchen that evening, Winston weaving between my ankles, while Mabel watched from her perch on the refrigerator, I felt genuinely content. I had a home I had bought with my own money, a career I had built through my own efforts, investments that would continue growing, whether or not my family ever fully appreciated my worth. And now, unexpectedly, a relationship with my parents that might finally become what I had always hoped for. My mother had told me I would always be last. My father had agreed. I had answered that it was good to know. What none of us had realized, least of all me, was that putting myself first didn't mean abandoning everyone else. It meant building a foundation strong enough to weather anything, a foundation of self-respect and financial security and clear-eyed understanding of my own value. From that foundation, I could offer help without sacrificing myself. I could show up for family without losing myself. I could forgive without forgetting. When the family emergency hit, they expected me to pay without question, to prove my worth through dollars handed over and sacrifices made. Instead, I proved my worth by being present in ways that actually mattered, by using my skills and my time rather than my savings, by demonstrating that love doesn't require financial martyrdom. And what happened next left them frozen. Not with anger or disappointment, but with a slow, dawning recognition of who I actually was. A daughter worth knowing, a sister worth appreciating, a woman who had built an extraordinary life on her own terms. They finally saw me, and that was worth more than any amount of money I could have given them. Sometimes late at night, I still think about that conversation in my parents' living room when I was 26. I remember the casual cruelty of my mother's words, the way my father refused to meet my eyes. I remember driving home with shaking hands, feeling like the ground had opened beneath me. But I also remember the decision I made the next morning, the new savings account, the freelance work, the refusal to be diminished by people who should have lifted me up. I put myself first in my own life, and everything else followed from there. Separate money, separate plans, separate measures of worth that didn't depend on anyone's approval but my own. When my family finally understood what I had built, when they saw the woman I had become while they weren't paying attention, they didn't know how to respond. The daughter they had dismissed had become someone they couldn't ignore. That's the ending I had never dared imagine, and it's the one I built for myself. One choice at a time, one boundary at a time, one act of self-love at a time. This is my story, and I'm proud of every chapter.